Folks, if you ever needed absolute, undeniable proof that Donald Trump is not a master strategist, not a chaotic genius, but simply a bumbling, flailing, wannabe dictator who has no understanding of the United States Constitution, look no further than what just happened at the Supreme Court. We are watching the total, humiliating collapse of the Trump presidency in real time, and frankly, it is pathetic, it is embarrassing, and it is dangerous. The headline today isn't just that Trump lost. It's that he was crushed. It's that the very Supreme Court he spent years stacking, the court he thought was his personal law firm, just looked at his power grab and said, absolutely not. On January 2nd, 2026, in a 6-3 decision that will go down in history as the moment the guardrails finally snapped into place, the Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump's federalization of National Guard troops in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland was illegal, unconstitutional, a direct violation of federal law. Let that sink in for a second. The so-called law and order president, the man who wraps himself in the flag and claims to back the blue, just got told by the highest court in the land that he is the lawbreaker. He is the one violating the Constitution. And the best part, the most delicious part of this entire debacle, it wasn't just the liberal justices. Oh no, Trump could have spun that. He could have gone on his little social media app and cried about the radical left, but he can't do that today. Because Chief Justice John Roberts and, wait for it, Brett Kavanaugh joined the majority. Brett Kavanaugh. The man Trump defended through one of the most contentious confirmations in American history. The man MAGA thought was a rubber stamp for the unitary executive theory. Kavanaugh looked at the arguments presented by Trump's Department of Justice, looked at the undeniable facts, and essentially said, this is nonsense. This ruling strips Trump of his ability to use military force against American cities at the exact moment he is most desperate to project power. We are talking about a president facing impeachment, facing war crimes accusations in Venezuela, facing a rebellion from blue state governors. And now he has been stripped of his muscle. He wanted to use the National Guard as his personal Praetorian Guard to suppress dissent in democratic cities. He wanted to occupy Chicago. He wanted to occupy Portland. He treated the United States military like his own private security force, and the Supreme Court just handed him a massive, humiliating loss. But here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the context you are not going to get from the corporate media that tries to both sides this insanity. You have to look at the timeline. You have to look at the cowardice on display here. Do you remember what happened on December 31st, just a few days ago? Trump suddenly ordered the National Guard troops to pull out of these cities. He went on TV, he went on Truth Social, and he claimed, oh, we fixed the crime, mission accomplished, I'm bringing them home. He tried to frame it as a victory. We told you then that was a lie. We told you he was running scared. And now we have the receipts. Trump's legal team knew this ruling was coming. They knew the writing was on the wall. They knew Roberts and Kavanaugh had turned against them during oral arguments. So in a desperate attempt to save face, to avoid the optical disaster of being ordered to retreat by the Supreme Court, Trump tried to retreat voluntarily. He tried to quit before he got fired. But the Supreme Court issued the ruling anyway. They didn't declare the case moot. They issued the opinion to set a precedent. They slammed the door shut so hard that the shockwaves are shaking the foundations of Mar-a-Lago. They wanted to make sure that no president, whether it's Trump or anyone else, ever thinks they can just seize control of state military assets because their ego got bruised by a governor. And how is the stable genius handling this? How is the man who claims to be the toughest negotiator in the room dealing with a constitutional check on his power? Is he accepting the ruling with grace? Is he respecting the separation of powers? Of course not. He is having a complete and total psychotic meltdown. I want to read you exactly what the President of the United States posted on his Safe Space app, Truth Social, moments after the ruling came down. And I warn you, this is the rambling of a man who has lost his grip on reality. He wrote, in all caps, naturally, SCOTUS joins the coup, deep state betrayal. Only I can save America from chaos. Think about the level of delusion required to type those words. He is calling the Supreme Court a part of a coup. He appointed a third of the bench. Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. These are his people. And because they interpreted the law based on the statutes, specifically 10 U.S.C. Section 12406, and found that Trump failed to meet the basic criteria, he calls them traitors. This is the mindset of a dictator. It's not hyperbole to say that anymore. It is the literal definition. To Donald Trump, the law is not a set of rules that applies to everyone. The law is a tool to punish his enemies and protect his friends. And the moment an institution, even a conservative one, says, "No, you cannot do that," he declares that institution illegitimate. He calls it a deep state betrayal. It's not the deep state, Donald. It's the text of the law. It's the Constitution you swore an oath to protect and obviously never read. The legal reasoning here is actually devastatingly simple, and it exposes just how incompetent the Trump administration lawyers are. Under the law, to federalize the National Guard without a governor's consent, the president has to demonstrate that the regular U.S. military forces are unable to handle the situation. It's a failsafe. It's meant to prevent exactly what Trump tried to do. But Trump didn't prove that. He didn't even try to prove that. He just declared an emergency and grabbed the troops because he wanted to look tough for the cameras. He treated the National Guard like props in a reality TV show. The Supreme Court majority opinion explicitly states that these procedural requirements aren't just red tape. They are constitutional safeguards designed by the founders because they were terrified of a standing army being used against its own citizens. The founders feared a tyrant. They feared a King George. They feared a Donald Trump. And today, the system they built, the checks and balances that have been under assault for years, finally worked. But let's talk about the dissenters for a moment, because we shouldn't let them off the hook. Justice Alito, Justice Thomas, and Justice Gorsuch. They voted to let Trump do whatever he wants. Their dissent effectively argued that the president has unlimited commander-in-chief authority that Congress cannot limit. That is a terrifying worldview. That is the legal framework for a dictatorship. Thankfully, 6 justices rejected it. But the fact that 3 justices were willing to sign their names to an opinion that says the president is above the law is something we need to remember. So what does this mean for the immediate future? Why does this matter right now, with Venezuela burning and impeachment moving forward? It matters because it validates Governor Gavin Newsom. It validates the Blue State Coalition. For months, Newsom has been leading the resistance, telling anyone who would listen that Trump's deployment of troops to Los Angeles was illegal. MAGA media mocked him. They called him a traitor. They said he was defying the commander-in-chief. Well, guess what? Newsom was right. Trump was wrong. California, Illinois, Oregon, these states stood up to federal overreach, and the Supreme Court just backed them up. This gives massive political and legal ammunition to the states that are currently refusing to cooperate with Trump's other illegal orders. If Trump tries to federalize the Guard again to deal with the protests erupting over the Venezuela war crimes, the governors can just wave this Supreme Court opinion in his face. The troops are going home, not because Trump wanted them to, but because he broke the law, got caught, and got slapped down. And look at the timing. This is critical. This ruling came down on January 2nd, one day before the Venezuela strikes, one day before the impeachment vote, one day before everything exploded. Trump wanted to enter this crisis projecting strength. He wanted to be the strongman with tanks in the streets of Chicago, showing the world he was in charge. Instead, he enters the most dangerous week of his presidency as a loser. He enters it as a man who has been publicly stripped of his power by his own appointees. The strongman has no muscle. The law and order president is a verified lawbreaker. And you have to ask yourself, where does he go from here? He's cornered. Judge Sullivan has given him 72 hours to produce the evidence regarding the Venezuela strikes or face arrest. We're going to talk about that in a minute because it is huge. But think about the position Trump is in. He thought he could use the military to protect him. If federal marshals come to the White House or come to Mar-a-Lago, Trump's fantasy was that he would have the National Guard there to stand in the way. That fantasy is dead. The Supreme Court just killed it. He cannot legally order the Guard to protect him from a federal court order. If he tries, those orders are void. The commanders know it. The soldiers know it. He is isolated. He is flailing. And that is when a narcissist is most dangerous. You look at the reaction from the MAGA ecosystem, and it is pure chaos. They don't know how to spin this. They spent years telling their followers to trust the plan, telling them that Kavanaugh and Barrett were 4D chess moves. Now they have to tell their angry, disillusioned base that the Supreme Court is part of the swamp. It exposes the fundamental lie at the heart of the MAGA movement. They don't care about the Constitution. They don't care about the rule of law. They only care about power. They want a king. They want a ruler who can do whatever he wants to people they hate. And when the system says no, they want to burn the system down. Trump's post, "Only I can save America from chaos," is the language of a cult leader. He is creating the chaos. He is the one bombing Caracas illegally. He is the one deploying troops illegally. He is the one defying subpoenas. The chaos is coming from inside the House. And then he has the audacity to say he is the only one who can fix it? Give me a break. The reality is, the institutions are closing in. The walls are closing in. The Supreme Court was supposed to be his firewall. It was supposed to be his last line of defense. If Congress impeached him, he thought the court would save him. If the lower courts indicted him, he thought the court would save him. That assumption just evaporated. If Kavanaugh is willing to rule against him on the National Guard, why would we assume he'll save him on the war crimes? Why would we assume he'll save him on the Epstein files? This is a signal. It's a signal to the lower courts, to Judge Sullivan, to the Department of Justice, and to Congress. The Supreme Court is not going to fall on its sword for Donald Trump. They are looking at his approval ratings, they are looking at the protests, they are looking at the undeniable criminality, and they are cutting him loose. They are preserving the institution of the court over the ego of one man. And for Trump, that is the ultimate betrayal, because he cannot conceive of loyalty to anything other than himself. You know, it's almost funny if it wasn't so tragic. Trump spent his entire life bullying people. He bullied contractors, he bullied women, he bullied political opponents. He thought he could bully the United States Constitution. He thought he could bully the separation of powers. But the Constitution pushes back. And on January 2nd, it pushed back hard. I want to show you something else. Look at the market reaction. Wall Street initially rallied when this ruling came out. Why? Because money hates uncertainty. And a rogue president using the military to occupy American cities is the definition of uncertainty. The markets breathed a sigh of relief because the system worked. They saw a check on the madness. Of course, that relief didn't last long because the very next day, Trump decided to blow up our foreign policy in Venezuela, which we will get to. But in that moment, the message was clear. American democracy is resilient. It is battered, it is bruised, it is hanging by a thread, but it is not dead yet. And let's be honest about the Democratic governors here. Gavin Newsom, J.B. Pritzker in Illinois, Tina Kotek in Oregon. They took a massive risk. They refused to comply with a federalization order. In normal times, that is a constitutional crisis. But they knew. They knew the law was on their side. They stood their ground. Contrast that with the Republicans in Congress who are still, even now, terrified to say a bad word about dear leader. They are looking at a Supreme Court ruling that says the president broke the law, and they are silent. They are hiding under their desks. It's cowardice, pure and simple. The Democrats are acting like the party of law and order. They are the ones defending the statutes. They are the ones defending the Constitution. The Republicans are defending a criminal. This ruling also completely destroys the GOP narrative for the midterms. They wanted to run on Democrat cities are out of control. We need Trump to clean them up. Well, the Supreme Court just said Trump's method of cleaning them up is illegal. So what is their platform now? Vote for us. We ignore court orders. Vote for us. We believe in military dictatorships. Good luck with that. This is a turning point. We are going to look back at this decision as the moment the fever broke, or at least the moment the fever was diagnosed as fatal to his presidency. Trump knows it. That's why he's screaming about coups. He knows that without the threat of military force, he is just a sad old man shouting at clouds in Florida, waiting for the marshals to knock on the door. And speaking of marshals knocking on the door, that reality is getting closer by the minute. Because while Trump was busy losing at the Supreme Court, Judge Sullivan was busy drafting an order that makes the National Guard ruling look like a parking ticket. We are talking about an ultimatum. We are talking about a 72-hour clock that is ticking down as we speak. We are talking about direct evidence of war crimes. Trump thinks he's having a bad week because he lost his toy soldiers. He has no idea what is coming next. The Supreme Court just took away his shield. Now, Judge Sullivan is coming with the sword. You have to appreciate the irony. Trump appointed these judges to protect him. He thought he was buying insurance. Instead, he bought a ticket to accountability. The 6-3 decision is not just a number. It is a declaration of independence by the judiciary. It is a statement that in this country, the president is not a king. And for a man who has spent his entire life acting like royalty, that is a reality check he simply cannot handle. So he lashes out. He attacks the court. He attacks the deep state. He attacks everyone but the person in the mirror. But the American people see it. We see the weakness. We see the desperation. You don't scream about a coup if you're winning. You don't call your own appointees traitors if you're confident. You do that when you're cornered. You do that when you're scared. And folks, Donald Trump is terrified. He's terrified because the one thing he understands, power, is being taken away from him piece by piece. First, the military option. Next, his executive privilege. Then, his freedom. We are watching the deconstruction of a wannabe tyrant. And it started with a gavel bang at the Supreme Court. But if you think the National Guard ruling was a blow to the Trump regime, wait until you hear what happened in federal district court with Judge Sullivan. Because while the Supreme Court was stripping Trump of his military power, Judge Sullivan was preparing to strip him of his freedom. This is where the story goes from a political defeat to a criminal crisis. This is where the rubber meets the road. And frankly, this is the part that should have every single MAGA enabler shaking in their boots. Because unlike the Supreme Court, Judge Sullivan isn't dealing with abstract constitutional questions. He's dealing with dead bodies. He's dealing with video evidence. He's dealing with a president who ordered a strike on civilians and tried to hide the tapes. And he just issued an order that has the White House counsel's office in a state of absolute panic. Let's talk about the 72-hour ultimatum. Let's talk about what happens when a president who thinks he is above the law runs headfirst into a federal judge who knows he isn't. Transitioning to that right now, because you need to understand the stakes. The Supreme Court set the table, but Judge Sullivan is about to serve the meal. And trust me, Trump is not going to like the taste of justice. Here is the headline: the clock is ticking, and Trump is out of time. And look, folks, if you think the Supreme Court ruling on the National Guard was the end of his bad week, you haven't been paying attention to what is happening right now in Judge Sullivan's courtroom. Because while the Supreme Court was stripping away his military toys, Judge Sullivan was preparing to strip away his actual freedom. We are talking about a criminal crisis now, not just a political one. This is where the rubber meets the road. And frankly, this is the part that should have every single MAGA loyalist shaking in their boots, because unlike the Supreme Court, Judge Sullivan isn't dealing with abstract constitutional questions. He's dealing with dead bodies. He's dealing with video evidence. He's dealing with a rogue president who ordered a strike on civilians in Venezuela and tried to hide the tapes. And he just issued an order that has the White House counsel's office in a state of absolute panic. Let's talk about the 72-hour ultimatum. Let's talk about what happens when a president who thinks he is above the law runs headfirst into a federal judge who knows damn well he isn't. Judge Sullivan looked at the DOJ and said, produce the unredacted war crimes footage or face arrest. Transitioning to that right now because you need to understand the stakes. The Supreme Court set the table, but Judge Sullivan is about to serve the meal. And trust me, Trump is not going to like the taste of justice. Here is the headline: the clock is ticking.